Um, Thank you to Niyogi Books, Trisha De Niyogi, and Sumit Prakash for arranging this Facebook Live event. They had published my earlier book as well, which was The Tenth Unknown, and now they've recently published The Chronicler. First, let me speak briefly about The Chronicler. It's set in the immediate future. In earlier years, it would probably be known as sci-fi. But now the more recent term that is used is speculative fiction. So the book is about the protagonist, who is called the Chronicler, plays the titular role, who finds himself in the middle of a power play between the US and China, and how inevitably India and Pakistan are dragged into it. So let me touch upon the geopolitics that this book deals with. You'll see my eyes darting up there because I have my other screen there, so I'm just taking a look at some of the notes that I've made. So yeah, let's talk about the geopolitics that this book deals with. It is about Chinese ambition and how China wants to be the most dominant global power and establish what is known as Pax Sinica. Now, where does that term come from? It's actually a Latin term, and the current Pax meaning people and Pax meaning peace, and it's the Chinese peace. But what is the origin of the term? So what we are currently living in right now is basically known as Pax Americana, where the world's top universities, the research, military might, software companies, airplanes, you name it, Hollywood, everything is of American origin. They've culturally and economically made their world a colony. But before America, and this, our grandparents and the generation before that can testify, before Pax Americana, it was Pax Britannica. It was the world's best universities, transportation lines like the liners, research, military might, industrial revolution, workers' right movements with their colonies in Asia and Africa. They were all British, and the Brits were the predominant global power at that time. That era is known as Pax Britannica. Now, it took World War II to end colonization, and the British had to take a back seat, and the Americans became the predominant power in the world. And you would say that they are probably a reluctant superpower. They're clearly not gone around colonizing the world, but they have been very trigger happy, and whenever their interests have been at risk, they have gone ahead and clearly attacked whichever countries they do to protect their oil lines. And but now it is the Chinese who want to take over. Clearly there cannot be another world war. I mean, the world is past the era of trying to capture each other's land. So the Chinese, how do the Chinese hope to achieve this? So there are two things to it. One is that they want their own transportation lines, which is why they don't want to rely on traditional lines which the British and the Americans have controlled. So they've come up with this new concept, which is the One Belt One Road, or OBOR, where they are building transportation lines for the energy, which so that they can be supplied oil and other commodities. They can export their products and import products from Eastern Europe and the rest of the world without relying on American trade routes. This is the One Belt One Road. Now, a critical aspect of that One Belt One Road program of China is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC for sure, where a significant amount of the One Belt One Road passes through the Chinese through the Pakistani territories. India has a problem with this because it passes through Pakistan-occupied Kashmir as well. And obviously India doesn't like the fact that China is trying to be this preemptive superpower right next to us. That's the hard power. Now what about their soft power? Since the early 2000s, I think 2003 or 2004, the Chinese have been building Confucius institutes around the world, where they try and teach about Chinese culture, the Chinese language around the world, and they have held, they build these Confucius institutes in universities and cities around the world. They've run into many sort of problems because of the curtailment of free speech, but they are hell-bent on spreading their soft power as well. They send a significant amount of Chinese students overseas. I think only India sends as many students, if not more, probably around the same figure. But the Chinese students have been, have gone to Australian universities, and they have forced Australian universities to revive the curriculum to fit into what is the Chinese narrative. They've also become the manufacturer of the world. They're also the second largest economy. So they are on that tangent where they want, where they want to become the next power and possibly displace the Americans. Now, where does India fit into all this? Now, we spoke about Pax Americana, Pax Britannica, and Pax Sinica. Now, there's something known as Pax Indica as well, which is the projected rise of India as a predominant superpower. Now, India has a lot of soft power through its NRIs, yoga, Bollywood. None of this is, because of the Indian state. It is because just of Indian cultural diffusion. The American and British politicians of Indian origin, it's very likely that within the next 20 years we might see a British Prime Minister or an American President who is of Indian origin. But India clearly does not have the economic power at the moment to compete with somebody like a China, let alone the US. So now, from the Chinese perspective, what do? Well, first of all, you want to not only displace the current opponent, which is the United States, you want to take over from them, but you also want to strangle your future opponent, who is India. So, from their perspective, they want to ensure that if Pax Sinica has to happen, not only does the United States suffer, but also India suffers. And what better way to keep India engaged than have it constantly, clash with its neighbor, which is much smaller, which brings us to Pakistan. Now, I don't want to talk much about that because I think there's a lot of stuff already in the media about it. But in a nutshell, they've always, whichever country has thrown their money or thrown their hands towards friendship, they've happily taken that money and done whatever it is they want from them, from the Brits, from the Americans, from the Chinese, from the Saudis. So that's the other aspect of it. So right now we are going through the coronavirus, which is indeed originated in China. So what does China do? Now, the Chinese do know, especially the Communist Party, that this is going to draw a lot of fire from around the world. We've seen hate crimes in the US. I think it was in a Costco or a Sam's Club where, Americans of Chinese origin were stabbed by an American. Even in India, I think some Northeast Indian students have been spat on and called chinky and go back to China, even though they're Indian citizens, which is extremely unfortunate. It's also a reflection on us, unfortunately, and as a society. But that's just how it is. But the CCP, this is the Chinese Communist Party leadership, is determined to turn this into the whole coronavirus crisis, even though it originated in China, into something of a Chinese rescue mission. They want to supply masks and medicines around the world, which is nice, but it's basically like someone coming and peeing on your floor and then giving you the mop as well to clean it up, and then expecting you to be thankful for it. In Italy, they're even putting up Chinese flags in Italian hospitals. Now, how does the world react to it? In most cases, you would think that the Americans have taken the lead in when under Obama, even before that, even though George Bush wasn't much, but he was actually a reasonably good politician and had good advisors. Unfortunately, the Americans are currently rudderless, without any kind of leader who can rally their own nation around and indeed the world around them. And Trump is clearly out of his depth here, trying to be presidential. And Britain has also elected, what seems like a complete clown. So, you would think that the EU, which is indeed an economic power, and if you look at them together as a bloc, even a military power, but they are always internally bickering about Brexit and tariffs and going in and out and who should be in and who should be out, and it's basically the whole of EU looks like a bad marriage. Now, you look at India, and what about India? How does India fit into the entire narrative? Well, it has the potential, and it would be of Chinese interest to ensure that India does not get credit for what it does. It has been flying its citizens in and out. It has been doing a great lockdown. I mean, I'm not personally a fan of the current administration, but I have to give but I try to look at things objectively, and and they've done a reasonably good job with what it is that they are doing under the circumstances. But India, it has a great navy. It has been flying rescue missions. but does it have the military might or the economy might to be a superpower, or take on China head on at the current moment? Probably not. Maybe 5 years, 10 years down the line, if we get our act together, and it's possible that we can potentially be the only country which can stand up to China. Maybe the Americans will elect somebody who is reasonable, and they too will stand up to China, instead of liking the Chinese and the North Koreans, which is absolutely crazy. So that brings us to the fact that what exactly do the Chinese want now? What is the next step for them? So they want to ensure that the world thinks that they are the saviors of the world, not the people who are responsible for the current crisis, but the ones who bring the world out from the current crisis. Now, is that a reasonable assumption? Now, personally, I don't think the people are that gullible. But you never know. We have enough media outlets which have tried to. We live in what is basically known as a post-truth world, and if enough media outlets are in fact paid off, they build narratives, and people buy those narratives. We've seen that in cases of Trump, in India as well, with certain cases where of completely false and rubbish narratives are propagated, and if people want to believe it, they definitely believe it. So can China do that? Certainly. I mean, they have they have the money to throw around, so they can certainly do that. And it's up to the people to look past that, people of the free world. Now, so is Pax Sinica inevitable? I don't think so. I believe that the world would not want a communist regime with little regard for human rights, to be the premier power in the world. We've seen what they've done to the Tibetans. We've seen what they've done to the Muslims in Xinjiang. I don't know how to pronounce that region, but I think that's how it is pronounced. And they will definitely try. They will definitely try to make sure that Pax Sinica is inevitable. This coronavirus has, pretty much been a super jolt to that debate, and this great game will continue. So, which brings me to the Chronicler and what this is about. And the Chronicler is basically about this great game that is played by these four powers, basically the Americans and the Chinese, and how India and Pakistan are dragged into it. And the protagonist, who in this case plays the role of the Chronicler, he has the memories of a politician who is the Pakistani Prime Minister in his mind, and who has been assassinated, and how he's running around the globe while the people are trying to, the powers to be, are trying to grab those memories, because they contain information which would alter the course of history. So that's what the Chronicler is about. I thought it would probably be better to give you a brief on the geopolitics of the book than to read out from the book. Maybe next time I'll read a passage from the book as well. Hopefully we'll soon have a web series too. I mean, we are working on that, and probably have good news for you in the first week of April. But thank you. It has been great. Once again, thanks to Niyogi Books and Trisha De Niyogi for setting this up. I hope my talk was informative and engaging. Currently, the book is not available on paperback on Amazon and on Flipkart because of the lockdown, but it's available on the Kindle. As soon as the supply chains are back, I'm sure you'll be available in the bookstores as well as on Amazon and Flipkart. But you can buy it off the Kindle right now if you want. Thank you once again, and see you soon.